Hi there, welcome to Grief Talk. Today, I want to do a couple of things. First of all, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you so much for being here. This is meant to be conversational, so there's no pressure to speak. But if you'd like to speak, that's awesome. I'm happy to have you participate that way. But if you are also just wanting to check it out and see what's happening, you're welcome just to listen quietly, and that's just completely okay. So today I want to talk about something that seems to be causing a lot of confusion and hurt in grief. And we all know that people grieve differently, but there's some confusion about how people grieve differently. So there's a model of grief that there are many, many models of grief and many grief theorists. Um, and one that there are a couple that I really subscribe to because I just think that they just make a lot of sense to me. Um, but one I want to talk about today is called the PEMSS Model of Grief. And the PEMSS Model of Grief, PEMSS is an acronym. So it's PEMSS. They've just recently added the second S, which means that in my grief hacks book, I'm missing an S, but you'll understand when I explain further. So the P means physical, and these are all different ways that people grieve. So the P means physical, the E is emotional, the M is mental, the S is spiritual, and the other S is social. And so basically what happens, it's sort of like your home, your house. You have, your living room, your kitchen, bathroom, bedrooms, basement, that kind of stuff. But typically, you live in one specific area of your house. So for a lot of people, that's the family room, or it's sort of the kitchen extension. Um, and that's kind of like grief. We have one way that we fundamentally grieve, but we visit the other rooms, right? So we visit, if I'm a physical griever, that's my default, but I can also be, in the emotional realm or in the mental realm, but it's just not my default. I don't go to that first. That's not my comfort zone in terms of grief and how I grieve. Um, and so the problem with that, particularly when it comes to friends and our family, is that we see grief through our own lens. And so if I'm a physical griever, I expect everybody else to be a physical griever. And I'm just going to let that land for a second because when we talk about family dynamics, it's incredibly impactful. So if I'm a physical griever and my daughter is an emotional griever, my daughter is 19. If she's an emotional griever, which means physically, I am busy, I'll clean, I'll tidy, I'll reorganize. And that actually brought a smile to my face just in recognition of the number of physical grievers that we have in this community. Because when I post on the daily content or in Grief Talk, in the grief chat, people will tell me, they're gonna clean the garage or they're organizing closets or they're busy doing things, which is one of the ways as a physical griever you refocus so that it's not in the forefront of your brain all of the time. And, so that physical grief, it could be that, you channel it and you're a real avid walker, you like to cycle, you focus your efforts in that way so that you can and so that you don't let, the grief thoughts creep in at those moments. Those are sort of sacred times, if I'm building a fence and I'm focused on building the fence and grief isn't really in building a fence. So, um then you've got emotional, and emotional is as it is described there. So people that like to emote, people who wanna talk about it, people who wanna feel their feelings, people who, um, uh, they want to process it emotionally. Um, M is mental, and mental is referring to basically the executive functioning in your brain. You want to do the research. You want to find out the answers. So Google becomes your best friend. You are absolutely research focused and answer driven. And like, why did that happen? Why did that happen that way? How could we have done things differently? All of those things. Um, S for spiritual. And so whether it's about communing with spirituality in terms of believing in a god or nature or any of the ways spiritually that one could connect. Um, and then S is the other S is social, and that's social connection. So, over membershiping in terms of clubs and being out there and socializing so that it's a distraction from the grief, right? Um, One of the youth that I worked with, um, one of the things he said that I found quite profound, particularly for a 10-year-old telling me this, is he was talking about the death of his father, and he said, "At school, you don't wanna be that kid. You don't wanna be the kid that's dad's died, because other kids can be really mean." And so from a social perspective, you protect yourself. And so you just go into a social environment and nobody needs to know that you are grieving. You just get to be social. So those are the different sort of rooms in the house, in the grief house. And so take a moment and just think, where do you fit in that house? Not talking about, yeah, "Oh, I'm never, a mental griever," or "I never do this," or "I never do that." But what is your default? Where's your comfort zone? And believe me, I know there is no comfort zone when it comes to grief. But where does it make the most sense for you? And for me, it's physical. So, for me, I'm all about let's get that kitchen reorganized. Let's get all of the things out of the cupboards. Let's um, you know, do the whole we'll get the containers that have the lids, and we'll put stuff in there, and we'll reorganize, and we'll label, and we'll clean the counters, and that's absolutely where my default is. But can I sit and talk about my feelings? Sure I can. Absolutely. After a while, it becomes overwhelming, and so then I need to stop for a bit. But I'm able to do that. So now I need you to think about, okay, if that's how you, grieve, how do other people in your household grieve? So, how do your children grieve? Because it'll be different than you. Some might be the same, but typically there's a difference. And so then there's this misalignment in grief styles. And what starts to happen is because my lens is a physical griever, I look at my daughter, who's an emotional griever, and I would say, I just can't keep up with this. Like, she's she's just emotional all the time, right? Um, and so for a physical griever, I'm like, "Hey, you wanna talk to me? Absolutely. Pick up a cloth. We're cleaning the kitchen. Let's go. And talk all you want." And that's how we can make that work. Um, but I often hear from parents saying, "He's not grieving, and I don't know how to help him because he's not grieving." And what they'll find is their 15-year-old son, who is in fact, focused on playing his game in his room. He's on his headset, talking to his friends. And it doesn't look like it's any different than it would have prior to the death. But here's the thing, that's their default. That's where they are. It doesn't mean they're not grieving. It just means they're processing that grief in a different way. And they'll visit the other rooms. Remember, they'll visit the other rooms, the other grief rooms. but they're not gonna live there because that's just not how they manage it, how they process it. So that's where we get sort of this friction or rub inside of grieving families. I'll give you a quick example. I had a mom who reached out to me, and she has a 10-year-old daughter, and the mom is like, "I don't know what to do with her. I don't know what to do. She's crying all the time. Um, I I wanna sit with her. I wanna talk to her about it, but I'm exhausted, and I don't know what to say. I can't fix it, and I don't know what to say." Um, and so I asked the mom, "So tell me, how do you manage your time?" And she said, "Well, I've been busy, I've been reorganizing the kitchen. I took everything down and just decided once I had done that, that I really needed to repaint the cupboards. So I've been working on repainting the cupboards, and then, I really liked some of the shelf liners, so I put the shelf liner in, and I really wanted to switch out some things that I didn't really use, so I did some switching out." And I'm thinking, "Okay, so that's the rub. We've got a physical griever, the daughter is an emotional griever, and mom doesn't know how to relate in this respect because it's new, right? Nobody teaches us how to grieve. That's the thing. Grief literacy is the least most educated topic, period. And I don't know why, because we're all going to die. We're all going to experience grief at some point. And so for me, it's about grief literacy. We need to educate people around this, just like we educate them around everything else in their lives. Anyway, getting back to my story, I digress. Getting back to my story. So once the mom figured out, I said, why not try inviting your daughter to come into the kitchen and help you? Well, you're doing that, and it gives her an opportunity to talk. That way, you can validate because she's not looking for answers, she's looking for validation. Is what I'm feeling normal? Should I be feeling this way? Is there something wrong with me? And give her that validation. You don't have to go into it in great detail, but just validate and say, "That sounds like you're really struggling with that, honey." Yeah, or "Boy, is that ever tough. I know how tough that is." Those type of things, because that gets rid of the friction point. And so those are some of the things that over the course of the next, few weeks and in my first group, coaching session with you guys, that I wanna do is I wanna talk about how do we do that, and how do we manage that? And I want you to come with examples, and let's talk them through because I think that it's already hard enough, and what we don't need is this extra friction point. The same thing happens with friends. They they have no clue. The number of people after, the death of my father who just dropped out of sight, never to be heard from again, and these were people that I considered good friends. Grief scared them, and they didn't know how to manage it, and they didn't know how to manage their relationship with me. Um, and the same thing I'm hearing from a lot of you is there are secondary losses that happen when somebody dies. It's not just the death of that individual, our loved one. It's also the secondary losses of, relationships because people, you're suddenly the third wheel and they don't know how to deal with the third wheel. So they just don't invite you anymore. They just go radio silent. There's no more social interactional stuff. And that is just so incredibly hurtful and challenging. But I challenge you to look and see who is showing up for you. Who is there? Because there will be people that pop up who suddenly have dropped by with a casserole and you thought, "Wow, I didn't realize we were even that close or that we knew each other that well." And suddenly they're the ones that get it, or they send you a text. No need to respond, just wanting you to know that I was thinking of you today. That's it. And that can turn your day around. That's the connection piece, right? And so we're going to go into this in a little more detail, but this is where I wanted us to begin, at least now. And excuse me, one of the things that I have been working on for the last about 18 months is a grief companion. And so I hear over and over and over again that people are feeling isolated. And even from the roster at the hospice that I worked on, the grief and bereavement waiting list, we had something called compassionate listeners, and these were individuals who had experienced grief and basically were there to validate. They were not there to do anything except validate. They were volunteers who would call out to people and a couple of times a week and just say, "Hey, just checking in, just wondering, how you're managing," and telling them that the fact that they have grief brain or or are not sleeping is perfectly normal. This is exactly the behavior that starts to happen, um, because your body neurologically is going through a change, and so these compassionate listeners would do that. Anyway, the program wasn't becoming as successful as it had been because it was run by volunteers, and the number of volunteers we had decreased. So it was no longer sustainable. So I kept thinking, there has to be another way. And so what I did was I created a grief an AI grief companion named Solace. And she is not generative. She is a closed system. So she only responds with what she's been programmed to respond with. She won't ever go off script. And so she's been programmed with all kinds of grief theories, all kinds of different losses, all kinds of different grief, ambiguous loss. She's familiar with the PEMSS model, all of those things. And what I really wanted to try and do was make it be companion like so that it would be like talking to your friend. Now, in order for that to continue, she is programmed to ask questions. So if you want to try, you can, and you're saying, wow, she's asking a lot of questions. You can say, stop asking me so many questions, and she'll stop asking you questions. Um, but I will do another video just showing you Solace and how Solace works. But I did want to bring that up in this grief talk just to let you know that there is an alternative. Um, and there's a way for you to feel less isolated and supported and validated. So I just want to put that out there. It's available in the classrooms. And in fact, I just want to go to the classrooms for a minute and show you a couple of things because I want you to see that there are resources there for you. And there are some paid resources and there are some free resources. And so I just want to show that to you right now. So I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. Great. So hopefully you can see this. And so if you go under community, obviously that's where we have all of the subheadings. So our grief chats and our coffee chat videos are in there. Our daily check-ins, all of those things are there. And so, but here is grief hacks. In this is a free downloadable PDF, and this has um, more information about the PEMS model in it and some hacks as well. It also has, I've also created the Grief Squad community workbook, and that's free to download. And this is, it just gives you some prompts as you go. And so you can work with it in conjunction with grief hacks or not. It's both ways. So you can use this independently, or you can use it in terms of in conjunction with grief hacks. So then there are the two paid things. And so the one is Body and Grief, and it's a 21-day guide. Um, and so it's structured. It's much more structured. It walks you through, try this, try this, try this. And it's based in our own bodies and the neurological changes happening in our bodies after grief. And then there's Solace, and Solace is also paid for, and it's just a quick bump up to premium membership. Um, and so Solace for a month is $12. So I'm just letting you know that. Um, and I'm going to put out a video just to talk more about how Solace is actually how you can use Solace. So it's there if I'm just going to stop sharing now. It's there if that's something that you'd like to consider. And if you don't, that's okay too. And nothing changes in terms of what is currently being offered. Everything that's currently being offered uh, is still being offered and at no cost. But if you want to make an addition, if you want to go a bit deeper, you're welcome to do that just with the bump up. And there are a couple of other extra added on things in that membership, but that's not necessary. So I'll leave it to you to decide what's best for you. Anyway, today I wanted just to introduce you to the PEMSS model of grief. I want you to put it into your thinking. I want you to think, where am I in terms of my own grief? What kind of a griever am I? Where are my family members in terms of how they grieve? And how do we actually manage that? And then when we uh, next week, I think it's the 29th, but we'll have to check the calendar. Um, I'm doing a grief coaching session, and that is a complimentary coaching session. And so, please come with your questions and thoughts, and we're going to really, really drill down on the PEMS model of grief. Okay. In the meantime, I hope that you take good care of yourself and find comfort. Um, that's really feeling helpful and supported for you. Be kind. Be kind to yourself is what I'm saying, because often we need reminders to do that. And reach out anytime. And I look forward to the next time. Have a good day.